Yay. Can you all hear me? Is this good? All right, thanks. Let's re-engineer education to embrace uncertainty. Okay, so if I'm audible, we can begin. That is not working. It was working exactly 1 minute ago. Oh, it's down. That's me. I included that slide here only because that I think is the last time I was here. I think so. That was September 2011, I think. I'm a CS grad from 2011 computer science batch, and once I graduated, actually even before I graduated, I spent more time studying cognitive science and how the brain works, how the brain learns, things like that, other than my traditional, like the curriculum of computer science. And a whirlwind of experiences later, what I did just after this was, I decided to take my first uncertain step. Today's talk is about uncertainty. The first uncertainty I took was, instead of doing my computer science kind of career, I wanted to make some physics videos. And I remember my mom and granny talking about it and being like, I don't know what's going to happen to him. Actually, the reality is even I didn't know what's going to happen. It turned out that the videos did reasonably well. A lot of the videos that I made had millions of views. There is a small chance that some of you have watched this at some point in your life. There's a small chance. And whatever I thought I wanted to do, let's just make great physics videos, felt really good, and a whirlwind of experiences later, I was finding myself as the head of Khan Academy. How many of you here have used Khan Academy at some point? Just like, okay, Khan Academy is working. So it was kind of my interest in education was triggered by Sal's TED Talk in 2009. So it's kind of interesting to do this now. And I found myself in an interesting challenge, which was that Tata had given us about $15 million, and they told us that you have a couple of years, and as the head of India of Khan Academy, how will you help Indian students meet learning outcomes much better than before? That was the question. And I realized that nothing in my education till that point had actually prepared me to answer a question like that. I had done my bit, right? I'd been a good student, reasonably good student. And I thought that if I do this, I'm prepared for life. And what I realized was, for answering a question like that, and actually why I'm there is I'm trying to find talent for it. So there's so much uncertainty in that project. You have a couple of years, you have a few $1 million. How will you hire? Who are you going to bring on board? What if it doesn't work? Lots of the questions that people were asking me, I had no answers for. And I learned that not only did my education not prepare me for it, it's exactly the kind of thing it oppositely prepared me for, because I could solve a JEE question faster than most people at Khan Academy. But for this question of what will you do with $15 million, I was probably average or below average. And it was kind of a wake-up call at 2016, and what it made me realize was that until then, I thought, like everybody does, all of you have heard this, right? Education's problem is that, we do too much rote memorization of things. We should teach it in a deep way, and I thought I was doing that. I taught physics really deeply. I understood physics deeply, I understood other subjects deeply, and I thought that was enough. But what this made me realize was that actually, the real problem is that there is a blind spot because of what we are not teaching at all. Even if I had learned whatever I learned really deeply, none of that would have taught me how to make a 2-year plan with $15 million at all, ever. Just didn't happen. And the realization was that the real problem that we don't talk about is what do we not teach? What should you teach to prepare children for this? And the other problem is that most of you here are good students, I presume, yeah? And even for somebody else who's watching somewhere else, right? The particular people who are affected by this even more negatively are the good students, and I'll argue why. So piece one is that the education model is too predictable. It makes it look like if you do this linearly, you'll get the answer and rewards will follow, and it kind of builds this in your mind. So they don't teach you some of the key things like maybe how to handle uncertainties, ambiguities, but the other thing is, forget what they're teaching. Just the incentive structure we are all in for a long time makes us believe this predictability very unconsciously. And if you're a good student in particular, you're made to believe you have an image to keep up, you're not supposed to like go down on it, failures are looked at as a bit of a negative, but most creative solutions need trial and error, and we're not really made to do that. So in my mind, I thought of it as, all our lives, good students are taught, especially ones who do the effort, are taught to behave like life's a marathon, where the road is really clean, it's well known, that circuit is known, and then master the art of running. Except world looks a little bit more like Takeshi's Castle, mixed with some Iron Man, and then you get punched in the face, and you kind of go back, and I saw this by the way. Most of my colleagues and friends were from IITs or NITs, and most of them, when faced with this uncertainty, wanted to go back and ask, what's the next exam I can write? That's comfortable. And I understood this is the problem. And it got me thinking about what we could do about this. And by the way, this is not new, right? Like schools prepare us for certainty is not a new idea that I'm giving here, right? We know this. By the way, if you all are curious, education was meant to be a simulation of the real world about 175 years ago. It'll be lovely for you all to read the history. About 100 years ago, it stopped being that. It kind of became this thing of its own, which even the original kind of founding fathers of education would be mind blown about. Somewhere about 100 years ago, and I'll not go into the details here, it kind of became its own thing, and it's remained that way. So for 100 years, it's like this. Why am I talking about it now? And the answer is that the pain of it being this way is being felt the most now. And I'll ask you all just to check. How many of you here have felt really anxious at some point in the last few years? Okay? The numbers do line up. I did for sure. So what we learn is that you all, Bank Center, might be the most anxious generation of all time, right? Now, why is that? It looks like the kind of unpredictabilities and uncertainties that you all are having to encounter is much larger, and education has always not prepared you all for it. Just that the pain is much more now compared to us or parents and people before. So what really happens is that this is not just causing underachievement. We can say, hey, maybe schools are not preparing you all and maybe there's some underachievement, but not really. If you look at the data, right, Jonathan Haidt is a researcher who's been studying this for a really long time. He wrote a book that published recently called The Anxious Generation, which is basically Gen Z, most people. And if you look at the data, the anxiety levels are going up disproportionately. 61% of, this is global data, but 61% of college students in India actually feel deeply uncertain about their future. So in one way, you can even feel like, hey, you're not alone. How many of you watched Inside Out 2? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's basically a movie. It's almost a borderline documentary on an anxiety attack, and it made $1 billion. So it shows that the anxiety levels are really high, partly because, he argues that it's partly because we're not preparing students at all ages for the unpredictability that's coming, and partly because of the kind of information overload of social media that makes it feel even worse than what it really is. So you can be like, cool, I'm anxious, but maybe I can duck the uncertainty. Maybe it's a phase. The uncertainty is going to go away. And I don't have good news actually for you all. Maybe you can escape the uncertainty. It's getting worse. If you look at World Economic Forum's data, it looks like if you're not able to handle uncertainty, it's going to be a problem because 50% of most employees are going to do some kind of relearning by 2025. You might know this already. Even more kind of weird stat, 85% of all the jobs of 2030 are going to be invented. This is actually Dell and somebody else. Sometimes I look at 85%, maybe not true, but you get the idea, right? Like it's a large number. And this causes some people to make claims like, these which, and you look at it and you go like, maybe they're not fully joking, And the question is that true? The reality though is that while the world's getting uncertain, it's not true that there are going to be no jobs. The Indian industry is actually adapting faster than most industries, okay? So I'll tell you what they're doing. This is already reflecting, this need for uncertainty is already reflecting in the market. So 7 of the top 10 skills so World Economic Forum creates like reports every few years. So 2023 and 2020 is when they did this. 7 of those top 10 skills look like, hey, we can't tell you what you're going to be doing exactly. So we'll start looking for whether you can handle the uncertainty, if you look at it. Hey, can you self-learn on your own? Can you manage with resilience, some kind of stress? Can you solve problems? These are what they're looking for. But is it easy to measure these with a degree? That's getting harder, right? So Indian employers are actually ahead of the world, by the way, because of the pressures of the market, because the number of people coming out in India is so high that Indian employers have to be more innovative than most of the people. So what they do is that their rankings have already changed. I'll tell you what I mean by this. Right now, if you go look at the report, Indian employers or industry kind of first looks at, does this person already have practical experience about this area? Have they done something? Then they look at is there a portfolio of projects that kind of shows me an idea about this? Then they talk about micro credentials. Hey, is there some proof that this person has shipped things on deadline, managed emotions, things like that? And finally, they look at a degree or a diploma. Now, why am I setting this context? The question is, if this is the world you're going to be entering, then preparing for a marathon doesn't make sense. So what can we do? We need to re-engineer certain things. And what can we do is one of the questions that I have. where I want you all to just take a moment to think about it, because we all keep talking about we need to change the education system, it's too old, it's too outdated, but those are not specific enough, I think. And a lot of times it's also like we need some new ideas, we need to reimagine, and I actually think that we don't need new ideas. That's my argument, okay? My argument is that we actually don't need new ideas. I'll argue why. So first let's kind of summarize, bring this down. There are 7 skills, there are many things, but let's try and focus on if there's only 2, what would it be? Yuval argues in his book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, that if you're able to learn new things, which is self-learning, and able to have emotional resilience, you will be mostly fine, because you will have to like use these 2 skills a lot. And the good news is that there's a lot of data in this field called learning science. How many of you have ever heard of this field called learning science? Is anybody aware of it? I rarely get a hand up for this. Has anybody heard this term learning science? Yeah, it's rare. It's a field that's been around for a few decades. It studies how the brain learns, and it has recommendations on how we can help students appreciate uncertainty better. And the first thing it recommends is that if students pick up projects that are ambiguous from a young age, are forced to come up with solutions on the fly creatively, are having to make mistakes and kind of feel bad about it, work with people, they tend to develop these skills better. Sounds intuitive also, right? It's kind of what you have to do in the real world, but there's data that supports it. Multiple studies over decades now has shown that projects as a tool for learning do work, especially if the projects are authentic, if you're able to pick them up, design them well, and then work on it. What's also interesting is that there's, like I said, no new ideas are needed. There's decades of research showing something called social emotional learning. Like if you teach, sounds very obvious when I say it, if you teach students how emotions work and how to manage them explicitly, like there are counterintuitive insights in physics, right? You think that bodies should stop, but they don't stop, they kind of keep going. There are some similar counterintuitive insights about emotions or how social interactions work. If you teach them explicitly, there is evidence that students do end up coping better. So partly we are being irresponsible with the younger generation by not teaching them this and then throwing them into the uncertain world and saying, oh my God, they're so anxious, dude. Like, I mean, surprise, surprise. You shouldn't be surprised. There's more, but I won't like go into the details of it. But the broad idea is that self-learning, which is called metacognition. Metacognition is basically the idea that if you're able to think about your learning, if you have enough opportunities to reflect, you tend to start learning better because you know how your own learning works. So all of this is a lot of data supporting it. For decades, it's not new. What we really need is engineers who are like willing to build this out in reality, in practice. And why I name this talk, let's re-engineer education and not let's reimagine it, is that we've been understanding what needs to be done for a while. What we really need is learning engineers. An idea that I have is that maybe in some time there'll be a BTech or something like that in learning engineering, where just like a civil engineer has to understand how physics works to build a bridge that people can walk on, a learning engineer would have to understand how the brain learns and build multiple bridges across ages for people, because different people at different ages are going to have to learn things and have to move from one point to another, and this will be a new profession is my prediction. So what could this world engineered like this look like if I'm inviting more people into this? Imagine that at some age 8, you're starting to work on projects straight up. There's a lot of evidence that actually works. It teaches you the subject better, it makes you develop the other skills better. And by age 12, 13, you are already having a portfolio of projects that you've done a little bit, and you've taken on some ambiguous projects, done badly, got some SEL coaching on how to handle your emotions. At say 13, 14, you begin to start doing some practical internships already. Just start doing a day in the week in one of the offices that you're doing. Get some practical experience also on top of these projects, so that over the few years, by the time you're like 18, 17, 18, you already have 8 to 10 years of experience building projects, having a portfolio, having micro credentials, like hey, 30 times this person shipped a project under a deadline. 5 times they worked with diverse people from across the world and they were fine. Things like these. And then you can set up a path where these students can take 2 to 3 options. Like if you were to imagine these kids like, going somewhere, they would now at 18 be able to take an informed decision because over years they now know that, hey, maybe I want to do this. The joke that I had is, at least when I did engineering, most people who took chemical engineering took it because they liked chemistry or something like that, which I don't know if it's still true. But you can take much more informed decisions about whether you want to go and get that degree or diploma. Nothing against it, right? You all will get it. But it won't come at the cost of the other top 3 ranks that we have, which is like portfolios or micro credentials or practical experience. Or you can go do like direct internship at a company that you have a relationship because you've done something since 9th grade with them. So you have some relationship with some employers, just go do something there. Or third, you can go and take an entrepreneurial path where you start off with some investors, write up, and then go study. So I predict this is how the world's gonna move, possibly. Now I want you all to think about this, right? If you are designing a new city, and if you're not biased by how things work, let's say we are founders of Singapore or something like that, would you start with a system that simulates the real world and then provides like a swimming pool kind of environment for it with support? Or would you start with what you have now and then try to make it slightly better? It's a question you have to ask because you have the opportunity to kind of design it from scratch. And if you do that well, maybe a lot of the students that we meet later will be very different from who we all are. Now one of the questions you all might have is, but hey, I'm already above 18, what do I do? And the reality is that it's not all bad news. What I told, right, in about 3 to 5 years, students can pick up projects on their own, make sure that they're looking at courses that particularly teach you how to learn, and then implement that in the projects. And get social emotional learning support. How many of you have like got some experience with CBT techniques, cognitive behavioral therapy, things like that? These are things that you're not expected to go learn, but go learn that, and in about 3 to 5 years you should be fine as well. But if we do this well, if we're able to re-engineer the system well and imagine this to be correct, my hope is that in about 10 years, we would have people who, when they're 25 years old and their field dies, which is going to happen possibly, not your job going away, not your company dying. Our parents never had to imagine the situation, what, my field will die? Yeah, if your field dies, we could either have students or people, young people who are devastated by it, or people who take the time to emotionally refresh themselves and be like, cool, you know what, I know how to learn, I know how to manage my emotions, I'm going to go do that. And that will make it more likely that we don't treat this as some kind of a, oh, what an amazing thing we're doing for our children or students. I don't believe that's the case. I actually think it's our responsibility. That's from a famous movie where Shivaji tells that, hey, this is not something to be proud about. This is actually our responsibility to build this out. So I'm inviting many young people to become learning engineers or DIY it yourself if you're going to do that. And that will make it so that students are able to take this uncertain world with embracing it rather than shielding from it and one day saying go and then do it, which will hopefully make it so that we treat the world. This is a famous cartoon from Calvin and Hobbes, which is the last cartoon, which says that, it is a magical world with all the bad news. It is actually more fun to go and explore that unpredictable world if you're prepared for it. And I hope we do that by building a system that's much more accepting of uncertainty than shielding from it. And thank you so much for my time. Yeah.